last years of the 19th century, that human affairs were being watched from the timeless worlds of space. No one could have dreamed we were being scrutinized as someone with a microscope studies creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water. Few men even considered the possibility of life on other planets. And yet, across the gulf of space, minds immeasurably superior to ours regarded this Earth with envious eyes. And slowly and surely, they drew their plans against us.
Broadcasting live
from a tiny studio somewhere in North America.
This is Dark Matters Radio Live. And now I give you your host,
the silverback of ufology.
Here's Don Ecker.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Boy, what a great pleasure to be here tonight. And I can promise you one heck of a show. My guest tonight is somebody that I've known for quite a long time. I've interviewed him a number of times in the past. One of the most prolific authors on the UFO field and paranormal, I might add, is Mr. Nick Redfern. As a matter of fact, when I put a promo up on the Dark Matters Radio fan page to announce that Nick was going to be my guest, I literally, and I'm not kidding, I got a couple of notes from people that said, "Hey, Don, be careful. He may be writing a book between now and the time he comes on." So that is actually perhaps not too far from the truth. I did a little... Say again, Nick?
I take weekends off usually, but you never know.
Here are just a handful of the books that Nick has turned out. Strange Secrets, Secret History, the Bigfoot book, NASA Conspiracies, Nessie. Nick, as a matter of fact, and I swear to God, this is God's truth, I went to my wife and I said earlier today, actually this morning, when something else happened that I'm going to be talking about in a second. But I said, I'll bet Nick's wife is very happy this coronavirus hit. And she said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, at least he's going to be home for a while." So, no. What are you saying, Nick? Did I hit too close to home or what?
Well, I mean, right now, I think I'm like most people, sort of watching TV, listen to music, read a book, because what else are you going to do,
Yeah, well, I'm raising hell. Anyway, so let me go into my rant. And I've got a minor rant tonight that I told my wife, Vicki, earlier today. I said, well, I'll have to explain what happened. But back in December the 30th, my wife had an accident here at the house. I was out at a meeting. I had been elected to the board of directors for our local association here. And I was it was the very first meeting. And Vic fell at the house, and it was a hell of a fall. She dislocated her shoulder. She caused severe trauma to her arm and hand, and she was able to call me. Thankfully, I was not very far away, and I was able to get back to the house pretty quick. Ended up having to call 911. They literally had to put her under anesthesia in order to get her shoulder back in place. But from that point forward, she was having a tremendously horrible time. Now, she wasn't able to drive, until just this past week, as a matter of fact. And just as she did her first physical therapy, the virus hit and they locked everything down. So here at the house, I've been working with her on her arm, and it's now just getting to the point where she is getting some movement out of it. And she wanted to get back to driving. So the other day, she had a doctor's appointment, and she said, well, I can handle this. It's only over in Burbank. So she took off, and just as she got done, she called me at home, and she said, look, I've got to stop at the grocery store. She said, do you have anything that you want? So I thought about it for a second, and I said, yeah, honey. I said, pick me up a bottle of red wine, Red Blend. Now, in the last 10, 15 years, I've grown to have an appreciation for wine. Earlier, I very seldom ever had a glass of wine, but I enjoy a red wine. Now, some of my favorites in the past have been a good Cabernet Sauvignon, a Beaujolais, which comes from the Gamay grape in France. It's a French grape. And boy, it can be a really nice bottle of wine. But for just having something for dinner, if we're having a steak or a pizza or something like spaghetti and meatballs, I just recently did a big spaghetti and meatball dinner. A glass of wine goes really, really nice with that. Now, where am I at? I'm in sunny Southern California. What is California known for? Well, besides the incredibly shitty array of politicians that we've got here and have had for quite a few years, the narcissistic, self-serve, well, I don't want to get off into that. But at any rate, we're known for our wine, the Napa Valley. I mean, good God, wine is, the second name for California. So when Vic got home, she actually brought 2 bottles of red wine, Red Blend. Now, I got to say, I do not very seldom ever have a white wine. I enjoy a red wine. And actually, if you get right down to it, I guess my first experience with a really excellent red wine was a bit over 30 years ago when I was still living in Denver. I had somebody I knew, an associate, who was originally a Hungarian, had come over here in the early 50s, right after the Hungarian 1956 revolution. He had been in the Hungarian army during the Second World War, was an officer. They were, of course, allied with the Germans then, and had served in both North Africa and fighting the British primarily, and then in Russia when Germany invaded the Soviet Union. So he introduced me to something called Bull's Blood, which was a very robust, very dark red wine that, oh Lord, did that go good with roast beef. Well, okay, so he would tell me stories about World War II. I would tell him stories about Vietnam. All, of course, after we consumed a bottle of Bull's Blood. Now, that was not very often, however, back in those days. Until the last, like I said, 10 or 15 years, we enjoy having a bottle with steaks and beef and pizza, that type of thing. Well, so Vicky comes home with 2 bottles of Red Blend. Now, I got to tell you, one thing that I get heartburn over is pretentiousness. And this morning, I hadn't really taken a close look at those wines. The one came from another vintner here in California that's a 2014 date. That's when it was bottled. And I thought, my experience with 2014s in the past have been pretty good. And then I looked at the second bottle. Now, this bottle is from a vintage by the name of Long Path. It's a 2017 vintage. And I thought, well, this might be pretty good. And then I turned it around and I read the label on the back, pretentiousness. I got to read this to you. When I read it this morning, literally, I had coffee go through my nose. And Vicky said, "What's going on?" I said, "You're not going to believe this. Listen to this." And I quote, "Walking between the rows of vines, we are reminded that life is a long path, each step providing more experience and more insight. As our vines age, so does our winemakers. They acquire more experience, greater depth and complexity, embracing the long path of life and appreciate each step along the way. Experience builds character in people as well as wines." So I looked at this bottle again and I told Vic, I said, "You know what?" She said, "What?" I said, "Well, after reading that, this bottle of shit better, by God, stand right next to ambrosia from the gods, coming directly from the Elysian fields, and I want to see Bacchus and his nubile naked nymphs bouncing about the ground." Okay, I got that off my chest, Nick. How about you? Do you appreciate a good wine?
No, not really. I like cold beer. As long as it's cold beer and it's strong, I don't really care about the name or anything.
Okay.
It's like beer or nothing, mostly.
Well, it's been a long time since we've talked. How in the heck have you been? I know you've been busy.
Yeah, it's been maybe 3 or 4 years, perhaps, maybe something like that.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, it has, and but yeah, keeping busy though, and still looking into all the things that interest me and that I like to sort of research and write about. So not much has changed really since we last spoke, I guess.
Well, I got to tell you, I was looking at cover-ups and secrets right before the show. Now, look, ladies and gentlemen, Nick has a brand new book out concerned with the Rendlesham case, which we're going to definitely be talking about. But, Nick, as I was going through this cover-ups and secrets, there were a number of things in there. And it's been a while since, and I'll be real honest with you and upfront. I have not read this entire book, but I came across something this afternoon that struck a chord with me, and that chord was being what you were talking about concerning Mars and what may have been a previously unknown civilization that was remotely viewed. Now, this week, as a matter of fact, just by pure coincidence, I have been up to my eyebrows in remote viewing information. Are you familiar with a researcher and a writer and internet presence and an occasional, as he bills himself, rogue journalist by the name of Gary S. Beckham? Do you know Gary?
Gary who?
Beckham.
Oh, yeah. I haven't heard anything from him for a long time, but I remember a few years ago, he was putting out a lot of articles sort of 5-6 years ago, or maybe more.
Exactly. Now, I know Gary. I've interviewed Gary 5 or 6 times, and then suddenly he kind of disappeared from the radar. Now, this past week, I have been trying to get in touch with him. There are several things I want to talk about with him. As a matter of fact, I've done some writing for his website, Starstream Research, primarily concerned with lunar activities, moon phenomena. But he was very aware that Ingo Swann was a friend of mine. Ingo, of course, was the fellow that basically designed the protocols that the DIA and the CIA remote viewers utilized when they were conducting their then covert intelligence sessions. But Gary is, I suppose, perhaps still in the middle of all of that intelligence milieu. People like Hal Puthoff, people like Kit Green, and so on. I mean, Ron Pandolfi. These guys are all somewhat infamous in that arena. And boy, he had his thumbprint on all of that. Now, one of the things that I found so fascinating several months back, when Richard Dolan went public with his story concerning Admiral Thomas Wilson and Wilson's partner in crime with that, God, and his name right now is escaping me, but the whole thing involved with Wilson allegedly being basically told to go peddle his papers somewhere else when he was trying to get some information on whether a certain aerospace corporation out here on the West Coast may in fact have their hands on some recovered alien technology, attempting to back engineer it. I'm sure you've come across all of that, right?
Yeah, you're talking about the DIA guy, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, I forgot his name, but I know you were actually talking about, yeah.
Thomas Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And one of Bigelow's scientists from the now defunct NIDS organization. But at any rate, all of these names very prominently are talked about in Beckham's 4 books, Spies, Lies, and Polygraph Tape, To the Moon and Back with Love, Quantum Strangeness, and the UFO spy games. Now, I got to say, I was somewhat shocked. Now, last year, with the To the Stars Academy specials that were running on the History Channel, with former Blink 184 guy Tom DeLonge and Christopher Mellon, a former Undersecretary of State for Intelligence, Hal Puthoff, and the guy from Lockheed Skunk Works. I had maybe heard about Mellon's name in the past, but my God, it turns out Beckham was writing about him and his involvement in some of this extraordinarily esoteric business in the paranormal realm. It was shocking. I guess it's true that all you got to do is hunt, and you can find a lot of these guys have been up to their eyebrows in this business for a long time. Now, what do you make of the tacit admission, I guess I could use that, the tacit admission that the government is now basically no longer denying the UFO phenomena is bunk?
Well, yeah, you're right. I mean, that's one of the sort of intriguing things that sort of really got took off sort of the end of 2017. When the New York Times came out with this story of a secret group within the government that had been investigating UFOs, and despite the fact that we were told, that with Blue Book, everything was shut down in 1969. So my interest in this, I guess, revolves around not just the fact that, that the story should have broken out and everybody got to know about it, but also, I think there's the sort of psychological angle. What was the reason for actually allowing the story to come out? And I thought that's one of the things that interests me. Are we talking about something that might be sort of like a slow process towards disclosure? Is it, just seeing how people respond to the UFO subject? And I think, the primary benefit, I would say, from my perspective about all of this is how the media coverage, went along. And it wasn't sort of, poking fun at people and, get a life or anything like that, It really was something that was discussed on mainstream media day and evening. And I think that's a very positive thing. Now, whether they just decided to reveal the information or this is sort of a build-up to something else and to something else, I'm not entirely sure. But for ufology, I mean, the last few years, 3 or 4 years, have been really good years because it's really kind of expanded our position, if you like, and we're not sort of just viewed as a bunch of eccentrics.
Well, that's true. And for anybody that cares to actually take a look, an in-depth look at the topic, would have to admit that there can't possibly be this much smoke without some fire. Now, back in the very early 1990s, I interviewed television journalist and reporter Chuck DeCarroll. Now, Chuck had and it was something that originally turned me on to him, had a lot of military background. He had actually attended and went through and graduated the U.S. Army Special Warfare School. And let me tell you what, that was no mean feat. He was, in essence, qualified to wear the Green Beret. Now, DeCarroll had been contacted and ended up doing some specials on a case that at the time nobody was aware of, that occurred in the United Kingdom at Bentwaters, where a joint USAF and RAF air base or bases were situated. And this, incidentally, at this time period, when this incident occurred, there was a very real possibility that war could break out in the European theater, primarily with the Soviet Union invading Poland. Poland was going through a tremendous upheaval. The people were sick and tired of the communist presence, the Russian heavy-handedness. And what made this particularly scary was the Bentwaters base was a forward operating base flying primarily a lot of A-10 Warthogs. Now, those were aircraft designed to blunt Soviet armor if, in fact, war broke out. And they also, it was a little-known secret at the time, we know about it today, it was also a dump where tactical nuclear weapons were stored. And suddenly, something happened. Apparently, the airspace was breached. Reports came in that something landed. Something had overflown the weapons storage area, shining bright lights into it. Nick, what was it about this thing that caused you to sit up and take notice? Kind of give me the background on that, would you?
Well, yeah, I mean, the UK is a small country. It's from the bottom of the UK to the top, it's like 650 miles, something like that. And so it's not a large place. So in other words, what's over here, in the news might get sort of overseen because it's such a massive country. And anything happens in the UK, everybody knows about it. And that's certainly the case with the Bentwaters-Woodbridge case of 1980. And back in 1980, I mean, I was still at school. I was just a kid at school. And the story itself, although the incident happened in 1980, the story didn't break until 1983. And when a memo put together by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt put this memo together, which was shared with the British Ministry of Defence, and the story started to open up in 1983, and it became, sort of a very big story, primarily because the location was just outside the twin bases. For people who may not understand the situation, the two bases were constructed during the Second World War, and because, there was a very real possibility that Hitler and his hordes might actually make it across the English Channel to the UK. And so a lot of new bases were hastily created and built and constructed, and a large number of US personnel came to the UK to help defend in the case that Hitler actually did invade. Now, so you had these two bases, Bentwaters and Woodbridge, both constructed in the 1940s during the war. And as you said rightly, then you had the Cold War and fears about the Russians, etc., etc. And both bases were extremely important because in terms of the actual sort of layout, the geographical layout, you've got the east coast of England, which faces towards Europe, and then past Europe, you've got Russia. So if there ever had been, a nuclear exchange, then Woodbridge and Bentwaters would have been the ideal places to have a strategic base, or two in this particular case. So anything really that went on in that area and involved the bases was perceived as being, very important.
And had hostilities broken out? Now, I have, because of what I did in the military and in Vietnam, and my knowledge that I have of special warfare operations, that would have been a primary site for Soviet special forces to hit too, because they would have definitely wanted to neutralize those tactical nuclear weapons, not to mention the A-10 aircraft. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I mean, they would, but I mean, it's also, it's important to note that there were numerous bases, up and down the East Coast and in the central part of the UK as well. It wasn't just Bentwaters and Woodbridge.
Well, sure, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, but all of these bases would have played a significant role. So, in that respect, anything that was sort of UK-based and involving the military, everything pretty much all the time was on standby.
Now, explain to, primarily our American audience. Now, I realize we have audiences that go all around the globe, but they may not be aware of British law in regards to foreign military personnel, even in the performance of their duties, being able to leave the American facilities with weapons. That's prohibited in the UK unless the British government give permission. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, the way it works is that, you've got the bases. I mean, both bases are shut down now. They're no more active, they're completely closed down. But the way it works is that if you're sort of like a US soldier and you're posted to the UK, typically, they might be in the UK for sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And a lot of the US personnel that have done that, have liked the country, and, they've extended their time there. And some of them, have applied for residency and citizenship as well. And so a lot of over the years, we're talking from the 40s right through to when the bases were shut down, you had a large contingent of U.S. civilians, after they'd finished their tours, who actually didn't go back. They, as I said, they took residency or citizenship and stayed in the UK. And so, you've got a situation because, the UK and the US are good friends. So you have like a large, historically speaking, a large contingent of US personnel, and then they've had children. And if you go back to the 40s, now their families are having children as well. So, there is, in the Suffolk area of England, which is where the bases were, there's been a long tradition of a friendly relationship with the US personnel, because some of them, actually didn't want to live on base, so they actually rented little cottages and houses in the surrounding villages. So in that sense, it's quite lax, really, because
no, Nick. What I was talking about in the performance of their duties. Now, during the Bentwaters incursion, whatever it was, allegedly, that landed in the forest, security police were sent out there. But my point was, because they did not have permission from the British government, they were not permitted to carry weapons out there. And it could have been anything. I mean, my God, it could have been Russian paratroopers or who knows what, You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the important things to note, people think... I've heard a few people say over the years, it landed on the base. Nothing actually landed on the base at all. What happened was, it was late at night, and a number of the people who were on patrol reported seeing some strange lights. They didn't. That's how they described it, sort of strange lights. It wasn't like a craft as such, and they got permission to go out into the woods and see what it was. And the reason why they had to get permission was because Rendlesham Forest is not part of the bases. Rendlesham Forest is just anywhere. Anybody can wander around Rendlesham Forest. It's not owned by, this farmer or that rancher or anything like that. It's anybody can sort of, on a Sunday, take your dog for a walk around the woods, and ride around on your bike, that kind of thing. So in other words, that's why they had to get permission, because they were actually going to be going out, in their military uniforms and going into British territory that was outside of the military installations. But, because these lights were actually seen very, very close to the East Gate part of the base and Woodbridge. And so what happened was that they were told to go out, and that's when things started to get really weird, with reports of strange lights in the sky and pencil-like laser beams coming down from the sky, and reports of some of the witnesses seeing like a craft. And the story's kind of confusing, because it actually wasn't just one night of activity. We know for sure that there were 3 nights of activity in and around the forest area, and there have been rumours of possibly other activity on the 4th night. And the reason why today we've got so much data on it is a lot of it is sort of thanks to Charles Holt, at the time the deputy base commander at Bentwaters, and he had this sort of presence of mind to go out with the team, and he took with him a small mini cassette player, and he was able to record up to around about 18 minutes of the guys in the woods saying what they could see and other ones corroborating it, etc., etc. And roughly about 10 days later, he prepared a memo for the British Ministry of Defence explaining the background of everything that went down. And the MOD, well, they said, well, you know, nothing happened, you know, there was no incursions or anything like this, so we're not that concerned about it. Now, I think behind the scenes, whatever it was, the Ministry of Defence knew about it and were playing it down. But the important thing is that now, and post-1983, we have the Holt memo, and we've got the audio of the guys out in the woods. And you don't really get much like that, you know, in a lot of UFO cases where the military have actually recorded, you know, what was going on out there. So that, you know, that sort of adds a great deal to the story.
Well, one thing that always, I won't say bothered me, but I wondered about, okay, considering the political situation of what was going on then in Europe, considering the fact that the Soviet Union, the military, had already initiated hostilities in Afghanistan, there was truly a real fear that they might do a 1956 Hungary type operation by sending armored forces into Poland. I always wondered why there apparently was no communication between the American military and the British military, considering they were both basically in the same area. And here is something odd, something strange, something unknown that may or may not have landed in the woods.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of sort of weird and mysterious aspects to the sort of early hours and days. Not so much in terms of, you know, what the guys were talking about. I mean, that was strange enough anyway. But you're right. You know, I mean, one of the intriguing things is that although Charles Holt prepared this memo for the Ministry of Defence, it actually wasn't sent immediately, and it was like about, I think it was 12 or 13 days after the event before the Ministry of Defence got the memo. You know, it wasn't like it was something that was, you know, pushed through immediately, like a top secret alert. It was actually a long time after the, you know, relatively speaking, after the events occurred before the MOD got the memo, and before they decided, you know, okay, well, something happened, just a few lights, you know, forget about it. And so, you know, that in itself is an odd situation when you look at the climate and the time frame. And, you know, and you're right, you know, when you said about the possibility of the Russians, you know, sort of dipping in the water, so to speak, to see how far they could get, you know, in terms of not necessarily initiating a third world war, but possibly thinking about occupying this area or that area like Poland. And then, you know, would America and the UK and NATO do anything about it? Or could they do anything about it? You know, for the fear of it spiraling into a nuclear war, that kind of thing. So it is kind of strange in that sense, but it almost seemed sort of, you know, taken very, very easy and laid back in terms of the UFO event in the early days.
Yeah, well, I would have thought at any rate, I mean, I'm sure the British military are no strangers going all the way back to the 40s and 50s to the UFO phenomenon. Admiral Lord Hill Norton, I believe it was, had a great interest in this. Winston Churchill, the former British Prime Minister is on record having inquired about what is it with these UFO reports? What in the world is going on? So, I mean, yeah. But with that being said, I had been brought up pretty much up to speed in the very early days when this story first broke. Now, like I said, I spoke and interviewed Chuck DeCaro. Have you ever talked to him, by the way, Nick?
To who, sorry?
Chuck DeCaro.
Oh, no, I never did. No, that was sort of when I was still at school, that bit.
No, I thought perhaps later.
Yeah.
Well, at any rate,
Yeah.
I had a really fascinating interview with him. Now, he was the guy that first put a national spotlight on the Bentwaters story. And I got to say that since that time, and it's been roughly now 30 years, I've seen a lot of twists, a lot of turns, and dare I say it, an evolution of the facts about this case. Did you encounter that during your research?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of confusion and, you know, some cases, or some of the witnesses, I should say, you know, with hindsight, you know, it was 40 years ago almost now before, you know, since the event occurred. So there's been some debate as to, well, what actually happened on this night and what happened on that night, and rumours of other things going on as well. So, you know, there are aspects like that sort of provoke confusion to a degree anyway, although the picture has been put together sort of fairly well now, you know, but in various other books and so on. But yeah, in terms of the, you know, particularly the early days, you know, because we didn't have that much deep sort of, you know, extensive data, it was very much still like a rumour mill for a long time. For example, the first book on the case, called Sky Crash, which was written and published by Dot Street, Brenda Butler, and Jenny Randalls. Their book came out in 1984, Sky Crash. But now Brenda actually lived in the area, and she'd heard rumours almost like literally a couple of weeks after the incident happened. So she was primed in the right area. And she got a lot of rumours and stories, and it was largely thanks to the three women that, you know, we probably would not have known about the case if it wasn't for the fact that Jenny, Brenda and Dot didn't look into it. You know, so we've really got them to thank, you know, to get things going. But in saying that, you know, it still remained very much sort of like a land of confusion. You know, it was... nobody really knew what happened. There were multiple theories, you know, was it a Russian satellite that had sort of gone out of orbit and crashed down, or parts of it had come down near the woods? You had theories that it was an early stealth type craft or something like an early drone. And so, yeah, when I first got into it, and sort of looking into it, I actually was only about sort of 16 or 17, you know, sort of started doing some research then. Nothing sort of on any huge scale, you know. You can't really do it when you're still at school, you know, you can't
Sure.
get too much done. But I did sort of look into it a little bit, and that was one of the big issues, was there were multiple theories. There were the issues surrounding the dates, and you know, the reasoning or lack of reasoning as to why, you know, the story didn't reach the Ministry of Defence immediately. So, you know, there was a lot of strange things even back then. You know, for a school kid like me, I recognised, you know, even back then, wow, this is a really strange, almost like convoluted story. And, you know, like, unlike so many other cases where, you know, a UFO comes down, somebody sees it, it goes away, and that's the story. But this one just has so many weird and different threads to it that, you know, it really required like a team to actually to get their hands onto it, you know, and see where it was going to go.
Well, being a former criminal investigator, okay, I kind of took notes when this thing first broke, and I became aware of it. I interviewed back in the day. I interviewed Peter Robbins and Larry Warren with this case. Uh, since then, Robbins and Warren have split. Peter Robbins basically disowned the book that they co-wrote, Left at Eastgate. Okay. A lot of questions about whether, in fact, Warren was actually a part of this case or not. At the time, back in the early 90s, when I first interviewed them, I basically took them all at their word. Something that later came up that bothered me greatly. One of the senior non-commissioned officers at the time that was a part of this was Jim Peniston. And what his story is today was worlds apart from what it was then. He basically today is saying that he's convinced that he was receiving coded information that maybe came from the future or the past. Who the hell knows? But that's not the story that was coming out then. Did you see a noticeable change in any of these stories?
Well, I mean, for the most part, if you look at the story, one of the problems is that it took a long time to actually get to speak with most of the guys who were involved. You know, some of them
were sent around the world, right? The military just got them out of there.
Yeah, and of course, you know, you've got the fact that some of them were, you know, told not to talk about this, and you know, the fact that it occurred in 1980, but the story wasn't spilled till 1983, and even that was just sort of the bare bones of it. And so, in other words, when it comes to the issue of, you know, the words of this person or the words of that person, one of the problems is that what we're getting is testimony that's there's no problems about it, but the one issue is that a lot of the stories and the testimony surfaced a long time after the events actually occurred. You know, so you're looking at really, you know, this wasn't like a break-in story where everybody was directly on it. You know, this was like a historical type investigation, even though it was like just 3 or 4 years. It pretty much fell into that category, and then, you know, people had to hunt down for the, you know, to find the guys and then get them to talk and things like that. So this really did become, in many respects, and still is, sort of almost like a historical investigation, purely and simply because, you know, we didn't get the story you know, immediately or even near immediately.
Yeah, and it's also true that even back in the early 90s, I was hearing allegations that this whole thing, Nick, may have been a very complex, highly covert. And once again, I go back to Gary Beckham's dive into the intelligence aquarium. There might have been extremely advanced technology that may have been employed by our government, the American government, on a lot of those service members. And there seems to be, to an extent, Men in Black type activity happening with some of these service members being taken away, allegations that they may have been injected with certain chemicals, their memories wiped of the events. I'm sure you've had to have come across some of these allegations, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's, you know, there are stories like, for example, you know, some of the guys being being exposed to like sodium pentothal, the so-called truth drug, to get their perceptions on what happened. And yes, there's the stories of missing time, and when you've got things like this, then you realise that you're dealing with sort of very almost sort of previously untouched, I should say, previously untouched territory. When you're not just investigating in a case, but you're having to speak to people whose minds may have been somewhat, affected in terms of memory and so forth. So this puts another kind of level of, problematic level on it as well. So, that's why I think, the case has endured, not because it's a famous case and an important one, but also because it's still requiring research. All the latest books that have come out in the last few years, one of the significant things to note is that there's a lot of new material, even after 40 years. So, when people, talk about, truth drugs and things like this, it's not at all surprising because, we're still getting new levels of data here and there. And, but yeah, when you talk about, sort of Men in Black type characters, and advanced technologies in the woods and things like this, this is where you started to get the, sort of the mirror image angle, if that's the right term to use. The mirror image being you've got the UFO angle, and then you've got the issue, was it some sort of secret experiment, like a psychological operation, to see how the military personnel would respond if presented with highly sophisticated holographic technology? In other words, to see if it could be used on the battlefield to essentially baffle and terrify the enemy, that kind of thing.
Well, we're getting down to where we're going to have to take a break because we are, believe it or not, Nick, at the top of the almost at the top of the hour. I had some questions come in, but I'm going to hold off on them because I want to give you sufficient time to respond fully. I don't want to have to break you off as we go to break. But let me just ask you this. The title of your book, where it can be purchased, and if we have enough time before the break, where you come down on this case.
Okay. Well, the book's just come out, and it's called The Rendlesham Forest UFO Conspiracy. And my book sort of already got a fair bit of controversy because at one point I was thinking about doing like a 40th anniversary book, but then I thought, well, the most of the stuff that I would be putting in a book like that would be just recycling what had gone on before. So what I decided to do was to look down the historical aspects of it and look into some of the weirder stories which pushed things down this sort of secret experiment angle. And I have to say that the more and more I dug into it and the more and more people I spoke with, I came to think that this was really like a psyop, a test on military personnel to see how they would respond when faced with something like highly sophisticated holograms, and to essentially see how the mind works when plunged into extremely alternative situations.
Well, for what it's worth, Nick, I think you're definitely onto something. I think you are definitely onto something. Where can the book be purchased? I would presume Amazon, of course.
Yeah, you can get it from Amazon, and you can get it from Barnes and Noble as well. So.
Okay, all right. Now, with this being said, and you indicated, and believe me, I'm no stranger to it myself, you indicated that this has created a lot of controversy. As a result, have you been collecting a lot of hate?
Yes. But I mean, I always tell people, I actually enjoy a good debate/argument because, you can actually get a lot, you can learn a lot, and it makes for good radio. But on top of that, I felt that the honest way to do this was to demonstrate why, from going from a kid, 15, 16, when I first learned of it, how and why my views have changed from that to now. And I felt that the best thing for me to do was to put all the data out that I'd found and the supporting material, the interviewees, that kind of thing, and let people see. Now, the problem that has happened with a number of people is that the whole issue has become sort of saturated with like emotion. And
you're
we
kidding,
all have emotions,
right?
when it
You're
comes
kidding?
to ufology. But when you've got the people who are so driven by the I want to believe aspect, that's when it becomes like a head-to-head, which, as I said, I'm fine. I don't mind that at all. But, I think we should look at all these cases openly and not with a preconceived conclusion. And that's what I hope I've done with this book, is to, in a down-to-earth fashion, explain why I think it was an experiment and not a UFO event, and put it out for people to see. But, of course, you have some people come out and say, oh, Nick must be working for the CIA, to say that, and, which I can assure people I'm actually not,
Okay, bravo, Nick, bravo. And we're going to pick this up on the flip side. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, my very special guest, been a long time getting in touch, Mr. Nick Redfern. His new book on the Rendlesham case. I've got some questions that we're going to be asking Nick when we get back. This is Dark Matters Radio, brought to you exclusively by KGRA Radio, your contact point to the paranormal and areas even weirder. We'll be back after this.
Why is it we're not very good with our health regimen until it's too late? We don't put oil in the car until the engine blows up. When the body's out of balance, your health is not so good. Give your body some love. Log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. Try our Life Change Tea, which cleanses you from harmful intruders. A clean colon is one of the ways to bring the body in balance. We also carry organic supplements to help you get where you need to go. So do your body a favor. Log on to getthetea.com. That's getthetea.com. You can even visit our sales page to save some dough. Does anybody call money dough anymore? Anyway, if you're looking for short, helpful health tips, go to YouTube and punch in Health Matters Now. That's Health Matters Now. So, log on to getthetea.com, shop, get balanced, then learn some cool tips at Health Matters Now. You'll be glad you did. That's getthetea.com. Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied, but you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states, and again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. surfermusic.com. Have a great day.
Hey, is that a new music app?
Yeah, check it out. Surfer Music Discovery. It links to thousands of online stations, but the twist is you see the song names and artists that are now playing live.
That's different. No guessing. Looks like a waterfall of music.
So many formats. Rock, oldies, country, R&B, jazz, and a whole lot more.
How's that spelled?
Surfer. S-U-R-F-R.
Is it expensive?
It's free. No need to sign up or sign in.
Get the Surfer Music app free from Google Play or the App Store.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRARadio.com.
And we are back with my special guest tonight, Mr. Nick Redfern. Nick and I have known each other for a long time. Nick always does a bang-up job when he jumps into the middle of something. In full disclosure, however, back in the 90s, and because I got to admit, I was somewhat affected by the I Want to Believe too. I had a major disagreement with one of his books concerning Roswell. Now, I still don't believe that there were anthropomorphic dummies on that V2 variant, which was the suggestion of what the Roswell crash might have been. I don't think they were disabled children or Japanese POWs, which I even heard that suggested at one point. And that was actually 2 years after the end of the war. But Nick, I think you're onto something with this.
Well, I mean, it's one of these cases. One of the important things is, unlike Roswell, which is sort of 73 years old now, Rendlesham is only 40 years ago. And a lot of the guys who were stationed there at the time were still, I wouldn't say young kids as such, but I mean, they were like 20, 21, some of them. So in other words, we're still able to interview a lot of the people who were around back then, because they're still here. They're only sort of early 60s now, or something like that. So that's an important, factor when it comes to investigating this. And that's one of the, why it's important, because we have the ability to sort of actively still look into it, rather than just sort of wander around discussing theories because everybody's dead. In this case, everybody actually isn't dead. In fact, hardly any of them are.
Exactly. And I, once again, allow me to applaud you. I've got a question from one of our users in the KGRA chat lounge. This is from one of our users, Stephen, one of our esteemed, I might add, users. And he said, in Nick's investigation, did he come away with any firm conclusions about former Airman Larry Warren? Was he even on the base that night? And in Nick's opinion, did Warren even participate in the event? I feel he simply repackaged several people's recollections and presented them as his own. Now, I'm sure you're aware that of all the people at Bentwaters, Larry Warren is today one of the most controversial. A tremendous amount of acrimony has taken place in the UK between various factions, those supporting Warren, those who are convinced that Warren fabricated this. I even, several months ago, got caught up in some of it, and I was actually kind of surprised when, out of the blue, I got hit with a bit of hate because I had, thanks to our producer, Bill Skywatcher, I had interviewed once again, and it had been years since I had interviewed John Lear. Lear, I made mention of the fact that Larry Warren was perhaps delusional in his recollections, which I thought was kind of a gentle way of stating what may or may not be the facts. I didn't come right out and say the guy's a prevaricator. Okay, I didn't say that, but I got hit with it nonetheless. What's been your experience? Because he was very prominent in the whole Bentwaters case going back years.
Well, I mean, I've known Larry since the summer of 1997, and the reason why it was 97 was because that's when their book, him and Peter's book, came out, Left at Eastgate, came out in the summer of 1997, and they did sort of like a tour around the UK. And I went on several of the stops, you know, the gigs, so to speak, throughout that summer, and got to know them. And you know, I'd run into Peter and run into Larry at conferences, you know, as you do, over the years, and got to know both of them very, very well. And, you know, so it was a big surprise to me when you had this big, you know, controversy started with regard to Larry. Now, as it seems to me, you've got people in two certain factions. You've got the people who fully believe what Larry has said, and then you've got, you know, the other side where they think he's a liar, and they've, you know, outright said, you know, they think he's a liar. So that's kind of where things are at. It's almost like there's no sort of place for like a vague grey area in between. For most people, it's this or it's that.
Well, now, no, wait a minute. There is one other group that could shed light on this, and those are the actual Air Force personnel that were out in the woods. What do they say?
Well, I mean, are you talking about the...
I'm talking about the men that were out there.
The ones who were out there.
The ones that were sent out to find out what those lights in the woods were. Mm. Yeah. Which is what Larry Warren said he was a part of.
Yeah, I mean, you can read in some of the books where it actually does say that, you know, some of the guys said they saw Larry out there. You know, that's not... Now, the way I look at it is, you know, that's a statement. You know, that statement has been made that Larry was out there. Now, one of the things that the reason why I don't write off Larry's story, and I'll explain why that is, it's because when the story began to surface and more people came out, you know, because they retired, etc., and when it came to Larry, and particularly Colonel Holt, Lieutenant Colonel Holt, as he was at the time, he's now retired, but almost on every occasion that when Larry's name was brought up with Colonel Holt, Holt would always say something along the lines of he felt that Larry had his mind meddled with to some degree. You know, in other words, so he couldn't be sure, Larry couldn't be sure, you know, exactly what it was going on, you know, what he remembered.
Well, for what it's worth, Nick, back in the day, in the early 90s, Warren basically told me that. Now, look, in full disclosure, I was Larry Warren's best man when he married his British girlfriend. My wife and I ran into Larry and his then girlfriend Sue, in Laughlin, Nevada, at a UFO event. I had known Larry. He came up. We talked. We sat down. We had several beers together. And he asked me, he said, Don, he said, I'm going to marry my girlfriend. He said, I've got a favor. Would you stand with me as my best man? I did. And my wife, Vicky, stood for Sue as her maid of honor. So, I mean, this is not, he's not somebody that I ever had problems with before this whole controversy broke out. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Yeah, and I mean, from my perspective, when I mentioned that Charles Holt, very often said, he thought that regardless of, the story that Larry had told and the extent of it, Holt would always say that, he still felt that regardless of all that, he still felt Larry had his mind meddled with. Now, roughly around about 16, 17 months ago, something like that, both me and Charles Holt spoke at a conference down in South Texas in a town called Edinburgh, and it's called the Out of This World Conference. It's on every year in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh's sort of almost on the border with Mexico. And we were both speaking at that conference, and we had because we were all there for the weekend, and there was Calvin Parker was there from the Parker case from 1973, the Pascagoula case, and we were having, a good time and chatting, and, and I brought up the issue about the controversy surrounding Larry, and bear in mind, this was only sort of 16, 17 months ago, and Charles Holt, now retired, said to me that he still felt that there was something had been done with Larry's mind, so again, you've got these people in ufology who are saying, there's nothing to this, there's nothing to that, and yet 17 months ago, Chuck Holt was still saying, when we were at the conference, he felt that there was more to the meddling side of Larry, the meddling of the mind. He felt that was still a part of the story. So, in that sense, again, you've got this controversial puzzle with different people, different sides, and that pretty much is like throughout much of the whole story, really.
I'm sure what you just said are going to piss off some people somewhere. So,
well, it might, but I mean, when it's, for example, Colonel Holt, as he was,
sure.
Who, I mean, if you read, like, for example, a number of the books and listen to his lectures, Chuck Holt does say, very often that he felt that something had been done to Larry.
Well, okay, I want to say one last thing, and then I want to move along. Okay, I've got some more questions, and one of them actually goes into something that I've been wanting to talk to you about. This is my last thing on the Rendlesham controversy. Now, a number of years ago, I went, my last incarnation with this show, okay, was on another network. And one morning, this is probably, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years ago, maybe not quite that long. One morning, I came out to, after I got up, I came out, poured a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and I was drinking my cup of coffee, and I turned on my cell phone, or I might have been on my laptop. But at any rate, I came across some threads where Larry Warren was talking about somebody on Dark Matters or Dark Matter that was trashing his story. Now, my radio show is called Dark Matters Radio, okay? I've been doing Dark Matters Radio. I started back with Dark Matters Radio. I've had other shows in the past, but I started with DMR in 2004. Now, I knew well that it wasn't me, Dark Matters. So I jumped into that, and I wanted to know what in the hell, who's blaming me for trashing Larry Warren's story. Well, it turned out it was not my radio show, but it was something else. And apparently, Colonel Halt, retired, Lieutenant Colonel Halt, retired, had been interviewed. And basically, Larry Warren was taken to task on this show. Well, I wanted to make sure everybody knew, hey, you know, my show is Dark Matters Radio. I never had Halt on, especially trashing Larry Warren. Now, I hope my memory is correct. But I was approached by Larry Warren and Sasha Christie, who at the time were still on good terms with each other. It was my understanding that Warren had been staying with Sasha and her husband for some time, had been a guest at the house, and they wanted to come on and basically come on my show and basically answer Lieutenant Colonel Halt's allegations. They did. All right. They did come on the show. I did give them the platform. And of course, later on, I guess the friendship between Larry and Sasha dissolved. And then there was a lot of acrimony between the two of them. I personally refused to get involved in any of that. I was approached several times, and I wanted nothing to do with that mud fight. And that's exactly what it was. It was a mud fight. So with that being said, I hope you're right that with all the witnesses still around, Nick, that they can eventually come to some type of conclusion. Now, I've got another question from one of our esteemed users, X-Lady in the chat lounge. Question, Nick is quite the prolific writer. How many books have you published, Nick, including the newest one?
About 56, 57, something like that.
And
actually, if you think about it, though, I mean, that's 25 years that I've been writing books. And so that if I do 2 a year, that's 50 books. So if you think of it like that, it's only 2 books a year, really. So.
Well, you're not writing one right now while you're doing the show, are you?
No, I've got my feet up on the couch.
Okay. All right, good. Now, this is a question from another of our esteemed users, Neutron. He says, Nick, now this is the question, Nick, that I wanted to go into. Okay. What's your take on the camp in the UFO field that believes the phenomena is interdimensional, it's negative, and playing with our soul energies? Now, the reason I want to go into this, several years back, you came out with an absolutely astonishing tale about a group within the Pentagon known as the Collins Elite that are absolutely convinced the UFO phenomenon, perhaps the interdimensional take on the UFO phenomenon, is, well, what do I say? Satanic, Luciferian, evil, negative energies. What the hell is your take on that now?
Well, I mean, the book actually came out 10 years ago this year. It's called Final Events. And it was a story that, funnily enough, the story that I got actually came from someone who was one of the early figures in the Rendlesham case, a researcher named Ray Boucher. And Ray used to be, he's still around and active in ufology, but Ray used to run the Nebraska chapter of MUFON in the 1980s. And he was approached in 1991 by 2 representatives of the DOD, Department of Defense, who were essentially scientists. They were working on a program to contact what they called NHEs, or non-human entities. And the reason why they contacted Ray was because they'd previously tried to contact these entities via like a remote viewing, that kind of situation, like mind to mind. And apparently the story that was given to Ray was that it was almost as if like a curse had descended upon the program, and there were bizarre deaths and like tragic situations, and sort of like, every day was like, your worst Monday morning. And it was almost like a curse, as I said, had come down on the group. And they came to believe that these entities were not extraterrestrial, but were sort of quite literally demonic. And the group itself kind of recruited people in the military and the intelligence community who had strong religious beliefs, and so they put together this sort of think tank type group. And it's important to note, and I pointed this out in the book, that this was the belief system of the guys in the DOD. It wasn't something that was proved; it was their theory. But it was fascinating, the idea that there was this think tank group deep within the Department of Defense being covertly funded to try and understand if the UFO phenomenon could be demonic. Now, sort of 7-8 years later, after the book came out, we had the revelations of Senator Harry Reid, who confirmed 100% that there were people in the intelligence community, in the government, who believed fully that the UFO phenomenon was demonic. And that sort of, gave a lot of weight to the story. Now, when people ask me for my views on this, I personally don't think that it's demonic. But the whole point of the book was not for Nick Redfern to say the UFO phenomenon is demonic. That wasn't what my approach was. What I did, I wrote a book that told the story of how and why the group itself came to those conclusions. So, I wrote it from the perspective of someone looking in at their story. But the other part of the question that your listener mentioned, this issue of the soul, one of the big concerns the group had, or conclusions that they reached, was that the phenomenon was not just demonic, but it was somehow using what they called soul energy, quite literally as an energy. In other words, we were sort of there, as Charles Fort famously said it more than a century ago, that we're property, we're somebody's property. And the group, the Collins elite, came to believe that the earth was kind of like a farm, and like the animals on the farm, you don't get to see the big picture until, it's too late. And that they believed that the human soul it contains some sort of energy that they would feed upon. So in other words, we were the cattle. And so it's a very strange and, twisting story of the Department of Defense, of demons, of the devil, and even, they were bringing in like demonologists to interpret sort of ancient texts, ancient books on demonology going back 400 years ago, sitting in the DOD, poring over all these books, trying to figure out, is it extraterrestrial? Is it demonic? And funnily enough, just like regular ufology, there were some people in the Pentagon who said, oh my God, this sounds like it is demonic. And then you had others who said, we shouldn't be doing this. This is garbage, So it's just like ufology, really.
Do you know if any of this is still ongoing?
Oh, yeah. It's still ongoing, yeah. There's actually a sequel to the book coming out, not by me, but there's a couple of researchers who asked me if I wanted to write like a follow-up book on final events. And I said, well, it would be more, I felt it would look better that if I stayed out of it, apart from maybe doing the introduction or the foreword, because instead of having all the information come from me, I would much rather have it where there's an completely independent investigation which has corroborated that and got new material. I think that's far better than me, doing final events too. So yeah, there will be a new book out, but as I said, not from me, and probably within the next year or so. And they've got a huge amount of corroborating data, and even more in relation to Senator Reid, who confirmed this in 2017.
Well, let me ask you this now: if I were somehow to become involved officially with a case like this, you said something that caused my ears to perk up immediately. There were deaths. Now, how many are you aware of? How many are alleged to have died as a result of this? And they died how?
Well, yeah, this is one of the weirder parts of the story. When Ray Boucher, one of the things I should stress, the main reason why the Department of Defense approached Ray Boucher was because he wasn't just a UFO researcher, but he was also an Anglican priest. So in other words, he'd got like a background in religion and in ufology. So if you want to investigate UFOs from a demonic angle, you would approach somebody like Ray because he's well versed in both areas. So that's basically how he got involved. Now, what Ray told me was that when he had the meeting with the guys from the DOD, they brought out like a briefcase and showed him a number of photographs and told him the backstory because these photographs showed 3 dead people. And one of them reportedly had sort of a weird crushing to his skull, almost as if like an invisible fist had just sort of made a dent in the side of the person's head. Another one, it seemed to be a heart attack, but there was no actual reason as to why it should have happened. And I think the other one, it was like undetermined circumstances. But Ray actually got to see the photographs, and he said each of the person was sitting in something that kind of looked like a dentist chair, sort of a lot of steel and fold back and little devices round by the arms, etc. It was kind of like that, and so we know that there were at least 3 deaths during the course of the program, but there was also a lot of just weird things going on and negativity, and some of the other people on the program got sick with sort of bizarre and rare illnesses and diseases, again sort of going down that sort of cursed angle, so to speak. And but as I said, it's kind of ironic that that Ray was actually one of the original researchers on Rendlesham, and actually spent a lot of time with his corresponding with his Senator Jim Exon, who's now deceased. But he pushed it with his senator.
Well, this would have seemed to have been a case, Nick, where government-sponsored remote viewers might have been able to shed some kind of light on this had they remotely viewed those people that had been killed or died. Now, I mean, the whole remote viewing thing in itself is extremely controversial, but I was and I knew a number of the people involved in the remote viewing Stargate program, and I've talked to a lot of them. One person who was very deeply involved, although not from an official standpoint, was Jim Mars. Jim was somebody, I'm sure you knew Jim. I had known
about 20 miles from me.
Yeah, I had known Jim for years and years, going all the way back to when I first became the director of research for UFO Magazine. And we had many conversations about the remote viewing program after it finally broke, publicly. So a lot of the information was released. And of course, I had a lot of conversations with Gary Beckham, especially when I interviewed him on DMR. And Gary had a very strong fascination. I guess he still does, although he's been incommunicado. But he's had a very strong fascination with the whole remote viewing thing. And it's amazing how much the RV business is entangled throughout the entire intelligence community when it comes to phenomenology.
You're right, and I mean you can find it in many countries as well. I mean, for the Ministry of Defence in the UK, they declassified their files about 10 years ago, maybe a bit more, and it wasn't a big program, but they did sort of address it, and the Russians were up to it and doing a lot of research, for example, to determine if, like, dogs, for example, had psychic powers, things like that. So. But, I mean, if you think about it, if you can spy on the enemy without actually having to go to the enemy's country, I mean, that's sort of the perfect espionage tool, so to speak.
Sure. And that's why I would have thought that somebody might have mentioned to these people involved with that research that maybe those victims, if in fact that's what they were, should have been remotely viewed to see if anything could be determined from what happened to them.
Well, I mean, that may well have happened. Now, Ray wasn't told, if that was the case. I know that for sure, because he told me that whoever took the pictures, and the people on the experiment, they didn't know how they died. But you're right. I mean, if you're going to try and figure out what did happen, I mean, it would have made sense to use remote viewers. So, it wouldn't, I mean, it's, in fairness, Ray had the first meeting he had was like, a sort of 2-hour lunch in a hotel in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so, I guess they were limited in time because they'd actually flown in from like DC. So in that sense, maybe they did remote view, the 3 deaths, and I mean, it would make sense at least.
Yeah, I would. Well, that's definitely one place I would have gone. But I mean, who knows? I've got another question from one of our esteemed users, ERRT Radio. He said, do the original investigators, the ones that are still alive, do they have visions or dreams? And do they get anyone visiting them? I think what the question is, this sounds like he's talking about remote viewers. Have any of them ever had any inexplicable events happen around them? And then I'll tell you why I'm asking that question.
Okay. Well, I guess one of the strangest things that I know from some of the remote viewers was that when they went remote viewing, and they were particularly trying to remote view, like, for example, on Mars, we're talking about the alien side of things, that it was as if when they started to remote view, it was as if the aliens knew that they were being remote viewed, and then they sort of turned the tables on the remote viewers, that kind of thing, kind of like they could become aware that when our guys were searching for them, so to speak. And that's not something you hear too much of. You hear about the remote viewers.
Oh, I have, Nick. I did. As a matter of fact, from none other than Ingo Swann.
Oh, okay.
But none of them apparently suffered any ill effects, did they, or are you aware?
Well, no, as far as I'm aware, nobody was hurt, at least in that situation. But, I mean, Pat Price, who was one of the best RVers in the 1970s, I mean, he had a very unusual death. It's been suggested he was assassinated, and some people said it was the Russians, the Chinese, and it's a very strange story, his death. So there's no doubt that there are hazards, when it comes to the issue of remote viewing. And of course, with the Collins Elite story and the guys that met with Ray Boucher, the way and means by which they were trying to contact these so-called satanic entities would have been something along the lines of like mind-to-mind, like remote viewing. It wasn't like we're talking about them landing or anything like that and strolling in the Pentagon, which would be bizarre. We're actually talking about mind-to-mind communication. So a lot of this really was revolving around sort of psychic phenomena rather than actual technology.
Well, one of the weirdest cases on the landscape today is the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah case. And during the Robert Bigelow NIDS investigation, which lasted, I guess, close to 20 years, all of that research is basically under lock and key. When Colin Kellner and George Knapp wrote their book, Skinwalker, about the stuff that they were allowed to talk about via Robert Bigelow, my wife and I went over to Las Vegas, met Knapp one evening. We had dinner, we had drinks, what have you. We were reviewing the book for UFO Magazine. Now, I did everything but get on my knees begging Knapp to intercede for me to allow me to go out to the ranch. And I got to tell you, it didn't happen, and today I'm damn glad. Now, when Bigelow sold the ranch to this new group, of course, there's currently an ongoing television series on what is alleged to have happened out there. Now, I have an in with one of the scientists out there, and I've been trying to get him scheduled to come on DMR to interview him. But I heard some very unquieting stories, not from him, but from some other people that had things happen to them out at the Skinwalker Ranch, including alleged entities of some kind that followed them home, almost like a poltergeist series of experiences. And I don't know, 6-8 months ago, I had George Knapp on, along with his buddy, the filmmaker Jeremy, and I can't think of his last name right now, that did the Bob Lazar documentary.
Oh, yeah, I know you mean.
Yeah. And I asked George point blank, because George had spent an inordinate amount of time out there. And I asked George, I said, George, here are the stories that I've heard that something apparently followed some of these people back to their homes. You spent a hell of a lot of time out there. Did anything like that happen to you? And he got very quiet, and then all he would say was, yeah, but he didn't want to talk about it. So, could this be along the same lines as what these people at the Collins Elite were concerned with, do you think?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Collins Elite were looking into, not just the idea that aliens are actually demons, but they were also looking at a lot of alternative stuff. I mean, for example, the Skinwalker is this supernatural entity in Native American lore and legend, but they were also looking at other places around not just the US but around the world where you could consider them to be like portals or doorways to other realms of existence. And they felt that that the so-called demons, that however you want to term them, that would enter our reality through these portals and doorways. And there are certain places around the world where they seem to be hotspots for bizarre supernatural activity, and you can find them everywhere. And so yeah, the idea that there could be similar things, and there's also a lot of stories of people getting close to these creatures and falling sick. Sort of not necessarily directly connected to UFOs, but you've got the phenomenon of what are known as the black-eyed children, and a number of people who claim to have seen them have fallen sick with fevers and just feeling very, very ill in the immediate aftermath. And the same with the Men in Black, not the Will Smith, Tommy Lee Jones versions, but the really weird ones that, in ufology, they're described as like pale and gaunt and almost robotic-like. They felt that they were a part of this situation as well, that it was demonic. So, they were actually looking across the board, and they felt that the abduction angle was like a ruse. It was perceived to be like a medical experiment, but they felt it was actually something to do with this sort of reaping of the soul, if you like.
Well, for what it's worth, back in the day, I knew John Keel very well. He, of course, wrote the seminal book, The Mothman Prophecies, it came out in the mid-'70s. And Keel, I'm originally from Pennsylvania, okay? So, we were not actually, I did not live that far from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where a lot of those things happened that Keel wrote about. Now, I interviewed John for a big article back in 88 or 89, I think it was. And we talked. I was fascinated by his renditions about the Men in Black situation that he encountered apparently repeatedly when he was doing his research on the whole Mothman case. And he had a very interesting take on it. And I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but at any rate, I'll lay it out for you as Keel laid it out to me. Now, are you aware that I investigated cattle mutilations when I was a law enforcement officer?
Yeah, because you also did the human mutilations as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did. Well, at any rate, we were talking about the cattle mutilations thing. As a matter of fact, Keel he had his fingers in so many pies, it was unbelievable. The JFK assassination, UFOs, of course, crypto creatures, Mothman, all of these things. And I asked him about the mutilations, and I said, John, what's your take on the mutilations? He said, well, consider this. He said, you investigated cattle mutilations, right? And I said, yeah. He said, they didn't have any blood in them, did they? And I said, yeah, that's right. They appeared to have been exsanguinated. He said, okay. He said, what if these powers or whatever they are using that biomaterial, blood, flesh, all the pieces and parts that are removed from this cattle to create basically avatars that can operate in our existence? And I said, you mean like the MIBs? He said, yeah. He said, I don't for a second believe they're extraterrestrial. I think they're basically interdimensional. And quite honestly, Nick, I didn't know what to make of that, but I thought about it for a long time, and I wouldn't totally dismiss it. What do you think?
Well, no, I think when you sort of first get into this subject, everything's kind of black and white, so to speak. But, if you look at some of the parallels between ufology and the paranormal, you can see them. It's just a matter of finding them. A good example, Albert Bender, the guy who arguably kicked off the whole Men in Black mystery in the early 1950s. A lot of people don't know, Bender was actually heavily deep into the occult. I mean, he wasn't like a dabbler. He was like an expert in the world of the occult. And when he saw these three MIB literally materialize in his office room, he said the whole room was filled with an odor of like brimstone or sulfur. And of course, brimstone and sulfur pop up in numerous paranormal stories throughout not just the decades but centuries. And there are other parallels like that, you know, all over the place, where you see a combination or a connection between the paranormal and ufology. And so for that reason, I think, you know, we're dealing with something that is alien in the sense it's not from here, but it may well not be extraterrestrial. I mean, we have to remember that the extraterrestrial theory is simply that. It's a theory. But it could be interdimensional, multidimensional. You know, some people have suggested the whole phenomenon's time travelers, you know. So even, you know, sort of more than 70 years after the Kenneth Arnold sighting, we're still kind of scratching our heads. And so, you know, I fully believe and conclude that there is a genuine UFO phenomenon. But I would say the extraterrestrial theory is exactly that, a theory, in the same way that, you know, all these other theories are theories. And I'm not really sure anybody, maybe even the government, doesn't really know what these things are. Maybe they've got their suspicions, but they may actually, after 70 years, still be thinking, well, okay, we've got data, we've got radar material, we've got footage, we've got bodies, but we still don't really know what they are or what their agenda is, you know.
Exactly. You're exactly correct. You know, you mentioned something a short while ago that I want to expand on a little bit while we still have a little time. You mentioned the black-eyed kids. Now, I got to tell you, Nick, in my lifetime, there are today very few things that unsettle me. All right. I've been to war. I've been a cop in the streets. I mean, you know, it's not that I'm bragging. I'm just saying, you know, I've been around the block. But the stories that I have come across in my years, especially in the UFO field, that really give me pause are these stories of black-eyed kids and the witnesses that have come forward. Now, it appears that there's some unknown law at work where these entities are concerned. It's almost like the classical vampire, okay, that they must receive permission to cross the threshold. And that's what these BEKs, these black-eyed kids, invariably do. They beg, they wheedle, they ask for permission to come in, whether it's an automobile, a front door, a back door, whatever. Now, most of the people that have come forward have always said that there was something so wrong with what they were experiencing, they invariably refused permission. But are you aware of any cases where, in fact, they were allowed to cross the threshold? And what happened if they did?
Well, that's a good question, because for the most part, they don't get into the house or whatever the property is. In some cases, you know, it's actually a car even. But yeah, the primary goal is to get inside, and most people don't let them in. But there have been occasions where people felt as if they'd been hypnotized somehow, and their self-awareness, if you like, was going away from them. And one guy talked about how he could actually see his arm move into the front door to let them in, but he wasn't, you know, he actually wasn't opening the door himself. You know, he couldn't stop his arm from doing it, which is kind of really sinister. Now, I I've got a lot of reports of black-eyed children, but I've only got 2 in which the people got inside. And in both of those cases, the witnesses said something that was pretty much identical, namely that when they came inside, it kind of felt like they'd been hit with, like, somebody had laced their drinks with something, or, they've been shot with something just as they're ready to go down under anaesthetic, that sort of thing for surgery. Everything kind of went hazy. But in those 2 cases, what's interesting is that both of the people started to feel weak and tired, and the way one person described this would be, or did describe it like this, is that imagine if you were like a diabetic and you'd missed breakfast and missed lunch, and then it was like 11 o'clock at night, and they start to crash and get the shakes and get cold and clammy. That's exactly how the people who got in, when they got inside the house, that's how the victims felt. They actually felt as if their life force or their energy was being drained from them and into the black-eyed children. It was literally as if they were feeding on the person's energy. Now, as I said, I've only got a handful of stories like that, but other researchers have got similar ones. So, even that kind of ties in with the whole the old vampire legends, not just the issue they have to be invited in, but you've got the issue of the victim being drained of energy, kind of like in the mythology, they're drinking blood. So I do sometimes wonder if the stories of black-eyed children in centuries ago may have inspired, the folklore versions of vampires.
So is that your theory on what they're actually after, is life energy?
Well, I mean, I can't say for sure, because the witnesses couldn't be sure. But all I can say with 100% certainty is that in the 2 cases I've got and several other cases that other researchers have got, every time they managed to get into the house, the person has started to get weak, and as if they're crashing. And the next thing they know, it's like an hour later, and they're just dazed on the couch, and the kids are gone. So, yeah, I mean, whether they're draining us of energy, I mean, that is debatable, but the witnesses thought that because they were just suddenly really weak, tired, and could barely move and, walk around even. So.
Well, it's been a while since I've heard about any cases. How prolific are they? Do you know?
Well, yeah, I actually wrote a book which covered that
quite
extensively a couple of years ago, called Paranormal Parasites, and I'm sure it's like the same with your radio show. If you do a book, you get feedback from people like you do with your show, and I've got quite a few stories of the black-eyed children. The most recent one I've got is, I forget the exact day, but it was like July or August of last year. It was the summer anyway. So, people are still seeing them. I guess one of the important things is the extent to which people actually report this or choose not to report it, because it's such a weird and bizarre phenomenon. A lot of people I've spoken to have shared stories, but they've said something along the lines of, it was definitely the black-eyed children, but please don't tell anyone and please don't print it. And, if people say that, then I don't. I'm not in the business of outing people. That's not my approach. But yes, I've definitely got reports from like last summer, and David Weatherly, who wrote the sort of definitive book on the subject, David still gets reports. So.
Let me ask you a weird question, and I have no idea if you'll be able to answer this, but I had the feeling that these BEKs, these black-eyed kids, that's not their actual form as children, that they take on an avatar, if you will. Do you think I could be correct or not?
Oh, yeah, a lot of people think that. I mean, for example, the physical look of them anyway, they don't look fully human. I mean, the entire eye is black. You know, we're not just talking about the center of the eye. The entire eyes are black, and their skin is kind of like, when I say milk white, I mean milk white. You know, that it's literally white. And one of the intriguing things a lot of people don't necessarily think about when they're talking about it is the fact that the kids are usually, or they appear to be, round about the age of about 11 to about 13, something like that. Now, you don't get any reports. I'm not of any reports where the kids look about 6 or 7, and I've got no reports where they look 13, 14, 15. For some weird reason, they always seem to be sort of 11, 12, maybe 13 at the latest. So yeah, when you're talking about avatars and things like that, maybe they are almost kind of out of a mold, you know, and sometimes they use weird words. One guy told me how instead of saying, you know, can we come in, the girl said, may we come in? And he thought it was really weird that, you know, a young girl would say, may we come in? And he said to me, it sounds like, you know, the way people talk 200 years ago or whatever in England, you know, may we come in, that kind of thing. And so there are a lot of really weird things, you know, the colour of the eyes, the age doesn't seem to change, the way in which they talk. And some of the witnesses have said that their skin looks almost like plastic, like a sophisticated mask. So the idea that they could be camouflaging themselves to some degree, you know, is quite an interesting theory, really.
Well, Nick, believe it or not, we are, for all intents and purposes, out of time. Now, I'm not going to ask you where you're going to be appearing next, because who knows?
Right now it won't be anywhere with all the virus stuff. I mean, conferences are being cancelled, you know, left, right, and centre. So, you know, we just got to sort of, you know, get through all this stuff, and hopefully, you know, we'll all get out of it healthy and okay, and
keeping our
on,
fingers
you know.
crossed. Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
That's right.
Nick, this has been fantastic. I want to thank you, and I want to invite you to come back very soon.
Okay, I'll be happy to. Thanks.
Okay, one last quick thing. Are you working on your next book?
Yeah, well, my other big interest is cryptozoology, which is unknown animals, and my next book comes out in August. It's called Monsters of the Deep, so it covers like lake monsters, sea serpents, giant squid, legends of the Kraken, things like that. So it's anything weird.
Release the Kraken.
Exactly, yes. That's right.
Okay, Nick, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. This has been all courtesy of KGRA Radio, your contact point to the paranormal, and hopefully Nick will be back soon. This has been a fantastic 2 hours, Nick. Thank you once again. And hey, we'll see you next week. Good night. Have a great weekend.